Minister, how can we so have minimum alcohol price if we cannot have a minimum food production price?
Well, because the minimum alcohol price applies to alcohol that is sold within the state. And it's a price per unit of alcohol, and it requires it to be sold at a certain level, and it applies to all alcohol products, and it's obviously a measure as well. It's designed to be a distance, or to try and incentivise responsible use of alcohol and to prevent its abuse. So that's the mechanism behind that. But like where we have a situation where 90% of the food that we produce is exported, and that's what's determining the price, then I haven't seen anyone explain how such a system could be put in place that would have a meaningful impact in relation to the food chain.
So the new body or person, or the new office that's going to look after this, is this person going to be, or the board or whatever, are they going to be from farming background, or are they going to be from the private sector? What's the makeup of the intention of the person that's going to be looking after this?
So, well, there'll be a board, first of all, two of which will have to be representing primary producers, and they'll be appointed through the public appointment.
Out of how many?
Out of five.
Right.
2 out of 5. And they'll be appointed through the public appointments. Pardon?
5 include the chairman, or 5 and the chairman?
5 includes the chairman.
Includes the chairman.
5 includes the chairman.
Sorry,
but so that'll be the board that will be overseeing it. But obviously there'll be a really important role here for the CEO and for the lead person in terms of the leader of the organisation.
Where does the CEO come out? So is it approved by you or whatever?
The CEO will be appointed through a competitive recruitment process, probably through the public appointment service, most likely as well. Again, the criteria for that, we've been engaged with the Department of Public Expenditure around approval for that process and around approval for that post. And that'll be the first post to be appointed as part of it. And really the capacity and abilities of that person will be really important in relation to leading our...
When they come from the public appointments process, does that allow them from the private sector to come into it?
Yeah,
it does?
Yeah,
okay.
It does, yeah.
Just, if this body cannot basically put in minimum pricing, or they cannot get involved in cost of production, or they cannot get involved in, say, if a bad price is being given, they can basically, what you're saying is put out nearly a list of what's the general run of things in Europe and what's the general pricing in the rest of the rest of the world or in Ireland, and they can put out the cost of production. I'm just trying to get my head around what value will there be to a farmer going with that if they cannot, if they have no mandatory power to say to somebody if cattle are at €5 that they should be $5.25. They can sort of highlight the discrepancies that they see, but they cannot, going by you no more than the CCCP that we were on before, interfere, going by what you're saying there, in the market. I'm just trying to get my head around of what extra value will there be other than highlighting the problems, and have they the powers, if they feel that there's the likes of a cartel going on, to go in and seize whatever evidence? Have they that type of powers to go in and do that when they're appointed or when it's up and running?
So competition and powers under competition comes under the competition law deputy, but
so they're not going to be involved in that.
Yeah. So what we don't have at the moment is we don't have an independent office with credibility that assesses and reports and plays an active role in the food supply chain in relation to what is happening and providing oversight and transparency in relation to it. And if we think back, for example, to the beef protests of 2019, so much of that was about lack of trust, lack of transparency. That only really became, in order to address that afterwards, the Beef Task Force was set up, which conducted a number of reports commissioned out of that, and to tease out the issues at play, because no one was really in a position to actually assess that and report with credibility on what was happening. So what we need to have is an office which stands aside from the department, stands aside from processors, stands aside from primary producers, and has independence and credibility and specific function to be able to actually assess what's happening.
And if they say, sorry for interrupting you,
Yeah.
if they just say that beef was at, for lamb, whatever, we'll just say beef, was at €5, and they said, well, we've done an analysis and we believe that, there's room for $5.20. There is no legal, they have no legal mechanism or no powers, am I right in that, to basically force that onto the processor?
Yeah, well, because otherwise you'd be getting involved in price setting and determining the market and setting the market. And that's not something that's legally possible to do. But I mean, obviously what happens is, like, if you track what's happening in relation to various different prices, the markets we sell it into, the changing market dynamics over time, like most of our beef, for example, 95% of our beef is sold into the European market. You have European average indexes, and there can be variances from that. And it does vary. Sometimes we're above the European average, sometimes we're below the European average. But we don't have any, and we can, at the moment we get reports in relation to where the prices are at, but there isn't anyone operating other than actors in the supply chain themselves that can comment or assess that. So if you have an office that's separate, that can have the capacity and has the credibility and the independence to be able to assess and report on the supply chain, assess on market dynamics, call things out, and through that apply pressure in relation to what's happening and try and ensure that there is, fairness as much as possible to achieve within the supply chain, I think that would be an important addition to our food supply chain.
And will they be looking, as well as, say, will they be looking at the offal part as well as they'll be looking at all parts?
It'll be open to that new to look right throughout the supply chain and assess what's happening.
Is there? I know it from reading the document or the legislation that, say, for someone that's making a complaint, you're debating about having a fee the way that in it. What is that going to be later on, or what's the story in relation to the figure or whatever?
So I don't have a firm view on that at this stage. I think it's important through the primary legislation that we have that mechanism there. I think we would need to see how the office is being used. What's fresh in my mind is the experience in relation to forestry appeals and the vast number of appeals for forestry that were just able to be appealed simply by firing off an email and going into the appeals committee, where it got clogged up and blocked down, just by the click of a finger somebody can appeal, and there isn't necessarily a quality assessment of the appeal. So what was found there, when was a small but appropriate fee was involved, it meant that there was more proportionality in relation to how people engaged and appealed, and it certainly was. It brought about a more, I think, proportionate and appeal system in forestry, whereby, for example, now after that legislation which had been brought through the Oireachtas here December previous, which enabled a small fee to be applied, there's now the level of appeals that you would expect, and it would seem to be more proportionate in the system. So that would be the rationale for actually having that capacity there, that should the Minister decide that a fee of €50 or whatever it might be was appropriate, then, whereas otherwise you've nothing to stop one person sitting down and sending off 100 appeals, however frivolous, and using up time which is valuable and which could which may not be very effectively used doing that. Whereas if it was even a tenner or 20 or 30 quid or whatever, If you were filing in 50 or 100 frivolous appeals, you'd be a lot less likely to do so. And that was certainly what was found in the forestry, I think, in terms of the changes that were made there. And I think it's important that we would have that capacity here in this legislation too.
And the last question, in relation to, will this body or office have the powers to look at, say, the likes of feedlots as again farmers and the likes of vet and different things involved in the whole agricultural sector? Will they have the powers to look at all of that?
Yeah, and I think to have a healthy supply chain, I think it's going to be important that the office does assess issues which are important to those in the supply chain. That if there are issues which are creating distrust or which are seen to have a lack of clarity and transparency, that they actually assess that. They'll also then have the capacity to develop codes of practices as well, where they and to engage in the supply chain in doing that, and to make reports at all levels within the supply chain. So part of the challenge I've seen over the last while is that in the absence of having an independent, credible entity that can do that, it's very difficult to actually bring that transparency and bring it in a way that people will feel has been done fairly or done independently. So, in terms of assessing for example, the role that feedlots play, and they do play, we get lots of criticism, but take them out of it and see what happens would be good. But again, assessing that clearly, looking at the role they play, whether positive or otherwise, and being able to assess that, I think would be something which could be helpful, and something that an office which is the independence around this could actually do reports with credibility on.